what's the best advice on receiving and applying notes? How do I apply the notes that I receive? How do I respond to the notes that I receive? This is a big question, and I could probably spend a lot longer than just 5 or 10 minutes, but it's a tricky question to answer with a blanket statement because a lot depends on the relativity of the note, meaning there are, you might respond just fine to one note, but then there's something about character stakes or just stakes in general that you're like, well, what do you mean by that? So what we have to do as the writer is be educated about the screenwriting experience and the craft and the process in general well enough to then have a stronger understanding of how to accept and then apply the notes that are given. In other words, you got to continually educate yourself. We have to be. Writers too often think that they can just do this whole thing in a void and, not go to classes or whatever. Anyway, you're all already on this class, so it doesn't matter. But so first of all, if there's a note that you receive that is constructive, but you don't want to apply the note, you don't like it, because there's a whole other conversation about, the notes were just critical and pessimistic and mean, that's a whole other thing. But if there's a note that comes across that, like, for instance, so I made a little note to cover this. Screenwriting Twitter, meaning, X, whatever it's called, Twitter has a pretty solid community of screenwriters on there that I think you should all try to, pay attention to. A lot of big contest administrators are commenting back and forth. A lot of consultants have different pieces of advice. Nice long trains of comments and threads and things. But Matt Misetich is the founder and the operator of Script Pipeline. Script Pipeline is a friend of the ISA. Matt is a great guy, really smart. And he had this thread that he put out there in terms of this idea of stakes. Like if you receive a note where this producer or consultant or somebody is saying something along the lines of, I didn't feel enough stakes overall. First of all, that's a little bit of a lazy note because the person giving the note should be a little bit more specific, but sometimes you get lazy notes. So you're just going to have to try to read into that. There was a writer on there on Twitter that was saying something along the lines of, I keep getting a note like this, but does this mean I just don't know what stakes means? Like that, of course I know what stakes mean. But what Matt was saying, and it was a really great response, so props to Matt, was this idea that stakes are not just plot stakes. Like if I don't do this, the world's going to end. That's like surface level stakes. But when you look at something like a 40-year-old virgin, or Matt used the When Harry Met Sally example, which I loved him for because I bring that up in my classes all the time. People who have been on my webinars before I reference When Harry Met Sally, probably a little too much. But he was saying like that if Harry and Sally don't become together or don't get together, does that mean he just is going to go to Mets games by himself? No. What you really see is the character emotional elements that come into play and why certain situations and moments that the characters experience in some form of a relationship are important to them. And so, like I was referencing about 40-year-old virgin, what are the stakes? Like the plot stakes in that is it's nothing. It's just that he may just never have sex again. Or I should not even again, but ever. He's going to be 40 years old and older, and he's never going to have sex. Not a big deal when you look at it from kind of taking it out of context and as a surface level. But if you really pay attention to what Steve Carell's character is going through, it means everything to him. Like he's nervous about it. He's scared about it. He's incredibly self-conscious about it. He doesn't want his coworkers to know. This is an identity type of level of stakes. And so regardless of the story you're trying to tell, stakes come into play much more on a character personal level. So if you were to receive a note like, I don't feel the stakes, look to the characters, look to how you're presenting how badly they want something but can't have it and what it means to them emotionally. This is, turning into a whole lecture about stakes, but it's going back to that idea that we have to be more educated as a screenwriter. We have to read the books. We have to take the classes. We have to work with consultants. We have to be more than just someone who thinks they're talented enough to write a screenplay. And I know that sounds like kind of tough love. We have to have reasons that we believe internally as to why we're confident enough to write a screenplay. And you back it up by way of experience. So best advice on receiving and applying notes, this answer I'm sure you've all heard, is take the notes, meaning read them, and step away. And this is if you receive written notes. If you receive notes in the room with someone, don't just leave. But if you receive written notes, just consume them and go, all right, I'm going to take 10 minutes, maybe a day, whatever it might be, and just think about them, every single note. And do not act defensively. I think that's rule number one when receiving notes, whether they're written or verbal, or you're working with the studio executive or something. Just receive them. Don't defend the note. Don't explain why you did something. I get that a lot. It's fine to talk through the note, meaning, you kind of think about it and go, okay, so it could be like this, or, you can play with it, but don't defend it. It's the worst thing you can do, and the industry hates it. It's showing more you than it is showing the script and what the next draft might look like. And people want to work with people they like, that it's not just easy to work with them, but they're kind of malleable, they're workable. You can actually, when, if I was a studio executive, I want to know that when I give the notes to, so-and-so, that the person's at least going to consider them. Because if they don't, like, I don't want to work with you. This is my job. I'm supposed to develop the script with you. And even if it's a consultant, the consultant is doing his or her best to improve the screenplay, So just consume the note, think about it, and then come back. And if you have a very strong visceral reaction to something, especially if it was insulting or overly critical for no reason, I've received notes like that, forget it. Don't even address it unless it's very insulting. And then you talk to the person, be like, you could have said this differently. That offended me. But that's a very rare case. So do not be defensive, but also kind of like what I was talking about, stakes, try to read between the lines. Don't just read the surface level of the note. That's why consuming the notes and then stepping back and thinking about them slowly and non-defensively, you start seeing, oh, they might mean that by this note. And this is why receiving 3 sets of notes from 3 different people is important, because if you start seeing the same kind of note but said in a different way across 3 different sets of notes, now you're like, okay, well, I am probably going to have to address that, because all 3 of these people are noticing. They're just saying it differently.